Hi, my name is Joe Langlois. I'm president of the Fort Tabor, Fort Rodman Historical Association. This morning, we are going to go inside Fort Rodman, and we're going to be interviewing some reenactors who are depicting various armies from World War I. Here at Fort Tabor, we try to bring to the public living histories from the King Philip Wars right through World War II. Today, we are very fortunate to have a small number but a very enthusiastic group of reenactors who are going to depict German troops, Canadian troops, and possibly English troops as well. And so without that, we shall go inside the fort and begin our interviews. Right now we're going to be speaking with a private from the South Wales Borderers, Private Albert Hummels. Private Hummels?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your unit and some of the things that you might have experienced during the Great War in Europe.
Well, the South Wales Borderers are the Great War version of what used to be known as the 24th Foot. The 24th actually figured prominently in America during the Revolution. They were involved in the Saratoga campaign, Burgoyne's campaign up in New York. Mm-hmm. They had a few more undistinguished lines in their history during the Zulu Wars. I'm sure you've all seen the Zulu movies. That was
we have.
That was the 24th Foot. That was at the Battle of Isandlwana there. So it's all the same unit. Our unit was also in Egypt during the Napoleonic Wars, and also on our regimental badge we wear the Sphinx, indicative of our time in Egypt. And during the eventually territorial designations were added to the various regiments of foot, and we ended up in Wales. So we are more or less a Welsh regiment made up of local Welshmen, who at the time a lot of them were coal miners for the most part. So during the Great War, that came in very handy to dig trenches, unfortunately for them. So they were used quite often for just the everyday digging work in the Great War, unfortunately. But they saw their share of action. They were one of the basic British regiments who had to fight most of the battles in the Great War.
Why don't you tell us about what happened to the real Private Albert Hummels?
Albert Hummel was not in the South Wales Border. I picked his name because it was relatively close to my own. He was in the Royal West Kent Regiment. He didn't fare too well. He was at the Battle of Verdun, and unfortunately, his grave he's one of the unknown graves, essentially, where there's no body. It's just, it was known that he died here and is in one of those mausoleum-type places. But it's surmised that he was hit by an artillery shell, probably a direct hit, about 1 week before the Royal West Kent were done on the front line. And then after that, they didn't see any more action in the Great War. So poor Private Hummel probably missed surviving the Great War by about a week, unfortunately for him. But that's the usual sad story for the British Army at that time.
And indeed, there were many sad stories like that, yeah. Such as the war continuing right up until the very last moment when there really was no need for that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, you have a group of items on the ground in front of you that I'm sure our audience would like to hear about. I'm going to let you give you the microphone, and you can bend over and point some of these things out to us.
Okay, well, this is the standard kit for a typical British rifleman during the Great War. Everything you see here is what he would have had to keep on him, with a few exceptions. For example, this is a flare gun here. A rifleman would not have carried that. An officer would have carried that instead. But the rest of this he was all expected to have on him all the time, whether on the march, in battle, didn't matter. If they were crossing no man's land to take a German trench, he'd still have all this on his back for the most part. The largest items here, this is the web belting that you would wear around your shoulders and your waist. This is where he keeps all of his bullets. He would probably have at least 100 bullets on him at any given time. He might shove more in pockets if he had the room. This is his entrenching tool here. It comes in two pieces. The actual blade he wears behind him, and this is the handle that you can attach to it. It also makes a very effective trench weapon. What they would do is they would just jump into the German trenches with these already assembled, and would use that as a close infighting weapon. You have the individual pouches where he'd carry all his bullets. His bayonet would hang next to his entrenching tool. This is what's known as a sword bayonet. It would be attached to the end of the rifle in such a way that you could still shoot the rifle. You can see the hole in the middle there, so you can still shoot through the bayonet while it's fixed. This again is another trench fighting weapon, more or less, although it's not as effective when you're in an enemy line because you don't have a lot of room to maneuver with this. So in many ways it's designed to just really scare your enemy. Unfortunately, he has bayonets too. Mess kit. This is the standard British mess kit. He would keep other various items in there as well, maybe like his fork, knife, spoon, things like that, as well as his drinking cup. He would always have that handy at all times. Usually this is just hanging on the outside so he can reach it easily. That comes in especially useful for the rum ration. The British Army was still getting a rum ration during the Great War, and so you want to have that available. Over here, this is the large pack. He would wear that on his back while on the move. That's where he'd put most of his his spare items, like he'd have spare shirts in there, spare socks. In this case, I have a blanket in there, as well as a rain cape. The whole thing is sitting, this is actually another type of tarp. This tarp could also be, if you take two of these, you can assemble them into a tent. So you can make a small little pup tent with this tarp. But he would also have the rain cape because it doesn't make a very good rain cape. The helmet, that came about later for the British Army. Originally, they wore the service dress cap. They actually went to war in these and fought the early battles in this, so they had absolutely no protection from shrapnel, artillery, what have you. These didn't last very long for obvious reasons. So after that, they switched to the Mark I helmet. It's not comfortable. It's made out of steel. It's very heavy. But it did provide a little bit more protection than just a simple wool cap. Vital for every soldier at all times is the gas mask. The gas mask had to be worn, whether you were at the front of the line or the rear of the line. It didn't matter because a gas attack could come without warning at any time. These were worn around the neck and about as high as you could wear it. So if a gas attack was announced, you'd spend the minimal amount of time putting that mask on because time was of essence during a gas attack. You only had about a few seconds to get your defenses ready. This is a late war gas mask. This came about toward the end, so it's slightly more advanced than what they started with. In the beginning, they just basically had capes, goggles, handkerchiefs. It was rather primitive when the war started, but as the war moved on, the technology for gas defense got a little better. Even so, even they still weren't entirely effective. You could still be killed even with that on if you put it really quick. Gas is not much fun. Canteen, of course, he would always have that as well with him. This is known as the small pack. That's where he would keep his rations as well as his daily items. He would have a toilet roll in there, toothbrush, shaving kit. British soldiers were expected to be clean shaven, although mustaches were permitted, but otherwise clean shaven. So as well as his rations, usually cans, so that would be all in there. And finally, a British soldier in the trench would arm himself with anything he could get. So there's also a few knives here. This is a Dudley Robbins knife. This is a typical pattern for the British during the Great War. Its only point is basically to stab Germans, as well as there's an American version as well. This one's made out of rubber, so we don't hurt anyone. But this is another example of a trench knife. There were certain British soldiers, like the one I represent, for example, is a trench fighter, whose only role was when a raid was going on, you would jump into the trench, you'd have your knives out and ready, and you would attack the Germans up close. Knives were more effective than bayonets, but clubs were also used. Basically anything that could be used as a weapon. They would use kitchen knives. Family members would send them things from home for those kinds of things as well. You could just take a club, wrap barbed wire around it. It was pretty bloody stuff. Finally, the last item, the British rifleman's rifle, of course. This is a British Lee Enfield No. 1 Mark III. This is the standard rifle of every British soldier during the Great War. The magazine holds 10 rounds, and it is a single-shot rifle. It is not a fully automatic, so you have to fire each round one at a time, and it's a bolt action. So to fire the rifle each time, you have to flip up the bolt. It'll eject the old chamber, puts in a new chamber, and you can continue. It's a very rugged weapon. There were sniper versions as well. It was actually a pretty good weapon for the war. It was one of the better rifles that came out during the Great War. It had very good range, very good accuracy, easy to maintain, not a lot of pieces to worry about. And the Lee Enfield was the standard throughout that entire time. So every rifleman would have been armed with that weapon, with minor variations depending on where it was made.
Right now, we're going to be speaking with Albert's girlfriend, Charlotte. And Charlotte has really something, sort of remarkable to show us in regard to what she is wearing. Charlotte?
Well, thank you so much. I am wearing a typical dress of the period, and this is an actual authentic dress. This dress is 100 years old. It's dated from 1910 to 1915. It is linen with a lace detail. It is a little bit fancier than what a day dress or an everyday dress would have been, but not too fancy. During the war years, women would have worn very plain clothing to show their support for the men. To be dressed in a very fancy way or with a lot of bright colors was considered disrespectful for those people who were in a very dangerous situation. And plus, a lot of fabrics were being utilized for the military, so they just sort of used what they could get, and most of that was more of a drab linen. So this dress is actually authentic and from the period.
Now, Charlotte, during the period of time in England, what sort of work or duties would a woman have?
A woman would have done a lot of anything to support the boys at the troops. They would have done a lot of conservation with gardening, home gardening and plots, so that they would have their own food versus taking food that would have gone up to the front. And of course, they would have preserved whatever they could in terms of cloth, because all the cloth was needed for the military uniforms, tents, everything would have required cloth. So a lot of the clothing was repurposed. If it was out of date, it didn't matter. They would rip the seams and make new clothing out of it, that kind of thing.
I want to thank you very much, Charlotte. This has been really very interesting.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. All right. Right now, we're talking to two gentlemen from the 42nd Battalion of the Black Watch. They are a Canadian group. We have Lance Corporal Carney, and we have Private Mackenzie. And we're going to be talking with the Lance Corporal. He's going to be telling us about the unit and what the unit did when they served in Europe during the Great War. Lance Corporal?
Thank you. As many soldiers of the 42nd Battalion Black Watch of Canada, were both American-born. Early on, 1914, 1950, the Canadian government rented out the New Hampshire, Maine railroading train cars and basically went on a recruiting drive before the Americans came into the war, and they drove the trains through New England. And many of the New England patrons, the citizens, are Canadian-born. Their family, their lineage, French-Canadian coming through. In 1914, they had a recruiting drive at Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts, and that's what sparked me to join up and do my duty.
All right, I like that story.
Yeah.
I like that
so the 42nd Battalion's out of Montreal. We are a combination of French-Canadian with a Scottish heritage. As you can see, we're still wearing the kilts all the way through 1918. It's the last major engagement in the world that kilts are regular issued items.
Okay.
So Scottish troops are required to wear them. Early in the war, they wore them without the kilt aprons, and then they found out with all the barbed wire and what going through that they started wearing the kilt aprons on top.
Okay. What were some of the areas that the 42nd served in? Some of perhaps the major battles.
Yeah, the 42nd Battalion was at Vimy Ridge, which was one of the largest battles for the Canadian Corps. They suffered some of the largest casualties. There's also some of the other engagements like the Channel Nord, Arras, and all the way through the 100 days of the end of the war. The Canadian Corps is basically constantly pushing the Germans across France. And they also served with distinction in northern France, where Vimy is, and also suffered very high casualties at the time.
Okay. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about some of the items that you're wearing.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'd be interested.
Absolutely.
Okay. Maybe you could point out what Private Mackenzie has on.
Sure. The private's wearing his gas mask in alert position. It's called alert position because if gas is to be detected, he can immediately open the flap, put his gas mask on without having to gear down. On his head, he's got the Brody helmet, the steel helmet. On each side of the gas mask is his 08 gear. It's patterned 1908 webbing, where his clips, his cartridges would go on each side, He has his bayonet that would be affixed to the end of his rifle and his entrenching tool. If he turns around, you'll see that he's got a small pack. He's also got his mess tin hanging down below. And often this was detached if they were in a rest position with their entrenching tool, the spade of the entrenching tool at the bottom. And then one more turn, he's got his water bottle, and he's carrying the Lee Enfield rifle.
Okay.
The uniform that he's wearing was the all year round uniform. He's got a service jacket, which is a heavy wool jacket with the division and unit insignia on it. He's wearing his kilt, and like I mentioned earlier, I have the kilt apron where he's just wearing the kilt without the apron. And then he has his ammo boots, the B5 boot, along with the leggings and hose tops.
Okay.
And this was a standard dress for anybody in the 42nd Battalion.
Perhaps you could tell our listeners and our viewers about your rifle.
Yeah, my rifle is designed to fire rifle grenades. How it works is this cup on top. You would take the rifle and you'd brace it against something. And in the chamber, you'd have a blank round. Reason being is the grenade itself is dropped into the cup with a flat disc on the bottom. And when the blank is fired, the pressure of the blank sends the rifle grenade out. The reason they invented something like this is with trench warfare. Rather than getting a soldier within throwing range, they decided that they can now fire from trench to trench with the grenade. And how it works is you pull the pin on the grenade, but you hold the spoon, and when you put it in there, the cup prevents it from going off. When it's shot out of the barrel, the spoon detaches, the grenade's now live, and it travels into the other trench.
Okay. Now, did Lance Corporal Carney and Private McKenzie make it through the war?
They did. We made it through till the end of the war, 1918, and at that point the 42nd Battalion returned to Montreal and had a grand victory parade in Montreal. And then moving forward, the Black Watch of Canada is still in existence today. So the regiment still continues to grow.
Very good. When did the regiment first begin?
The regiment was originally founded as the 5th Rifles, which would be the time during the American Civil War. So Canada, seeing all the hostility going on in Americas, started raising their militia, and they first were brought up as the 5th to start fortifying the border with the uncertainty that was going on in America.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
All right. We're talking to Private Peter Garrison. Private
Guten Tag.
Garrison, guten Tag. Guten Tag to you. How are you finding this fort here in America?
Nice.
You like it here, huh? Okay, good. Well, we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Very happy. Could you just tell us a little bit about, more specifically about, some of the battles that your unit fought in during the war?
Oh, they fought in the Eastern Front. They fought against the Russians. They fought. They were the Brunswicks were from the western part of Germany. They moved them to the eastern part, the Eastern Front, to fight there. When they were no longer needed in the Eastern Front, they were sent to fill the ranks of the Western Front. You know.
All right. Do you know anything about the history of this group? When was it first founded?
The Brunswicks fought, actually had a long history. They were defeated in the Battle of Bennington, Vermont during the American Revolution. That was their lineage goes from there. They fought in the War of 1812 at Waterloo, I believe. And they were also, their lineage, if you could notice on this hat here, the death heads. That was, they were allowed to wear the death head on the Kaiser Wilhelm in honor of their service during the War of 1812, the 100th anniversary service, the 100-year service in 1914.
Okay.
They were one of the few units that were allowed to wear death heads.
Now, did the unit continue into World War II?
No, by World War II, everything was nationalized. It was all nation. Again, on there, you have a national color, and you have the state color. the state was, you still had great pride in the part of Germany you came from, the state.
So they were like a militia or a National Guard unit?
Like a National Guard, yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, now you have a wonderful collection of items here that I know our viewers would like to see. I'm going to give you the microphone, and if you could talk about these items, we would appreciate it.
Okay, what we have here is, we have the pickle hob, the helmet, like I'm wearing, it's leather, boiled leather. And this helmet here is a Airzats helmet. It's a replacement. It was made out of leather and felt. And I can pull the cover off of here. And you see that it's a painted felt body. It has the cockades of the state and the nation. It also has a death head on it. And this linen cover was to keep the helmet clean. It's not, has a spike like on top of my helmet, and popular belief or myth was that this was supposed to be a weapon. It actually wasn't a weapon. The reasoning behind the helmet was to give the soldier height and the illusion of height from a long distance, and to represent the lances of Frederick the Great, and that back in the German history. Germany was a big country on their history. These are original German steel helmets, called Stellhelm. They came out in 1916. This is the 1916 model. It gave the soldier much more protection than the leather helmet or the felt helmets in the trenches, because 90% of the wounds in the First World War were head and shoulder wounds, and this gave more protection. It wasn't bulletproof, but it would protect you from artillery ricochets, indirect fire. This helmet has its original paint on it. This helmet was a repaired helmet that has been repainted. Over here, this unit fought on the Eastern Front, and this is the captured sidearm. It's a Mosin Nagant revolver. It was a 7-shot revolver. It was an oddity, but Germany didn't discard anything. They used whatever they get their hands on, captured or not. Over here we have field glasses, the 08 pattern field glasses, and the case that it came with, the original case. This is a shield like on my helmet, but an original brass shield. We have an Iron Cross second class. This is the Iron Cross that you would have been awarded on the day of presentation. After that, you would just wear a ribbon in your tunic. This is a wound badge. This badge was awarded when you were wounded 1 to 2 times. After the third to fourth time, you were awarded a wound badge in silver, and then 5 or more, you were awarded a wound badge in gold. And one of the Brits used to poke fun at the Germans, saying that the wound badges and the Iron Crosses came in their rations, but it wasn't uncommon to find a German soldier who had been wounded 20 or more times on 20 separate different occasions. If you were wounded, you were nursed back to health, and you were sent back into the front line. This is a match safe. It was something a soldier would have made out of his belt buckle. It would hold a box of matches. These are original belt buckles. This is the later version, the iron buckle that's been painted over. This is the early war brass with a silver emblem, and on you notice on the buckle you have the crown representing the nation and the Kaiser, and it says on it, "God's mit uns," which means God is with us. And this item here, this rectangular box, is a trench periscope. And you look over the trenches, you look into here, and you put the rest of it, the periscope, over the top of the trench, and you can see the enemy, observe the enemy without exposing yourself to enemy fire. This here is a German assault pack. This is the rain poncho, and either a blanket or a greatcoat would be wrapped inside of it. The mess kit, it would have rations inside of it, and he would sling this over his shoulder, and this is what they used when they assaulted trenches, instead of carrying a heavy and cumbersome backpack. And the rifles we have here, we have at the top, we have a Gewehr 98, Gewehr meaning rifle in German. The 88 is the date of the model at adoption. This one was manufactured in 1891, and it was used as a reserves rifle. This one here was a primary infantry rifle, the 1898 Mauser, and that was used throughout the war. 1909, they came out with a smaller carbine, and this was first introduced to cavalry and artillery units, and later on to snipers and assault troops in the trenches. And I'm wearing on my person the ammo pouches. Each pouch would hold three clips of ammunition that held 5, so you'd have 15 in each pouch. Also had a bayonet, a shovel. This is my bayonet knot, and this knot would show you what company I belong to. I belong to the 9th Company of Infantry. Over here I have a gas mask. This is the early issue gas mask, called the Germans called them Gummi mask, and that was introduced right after the introduction of chemical warfare during the First World War. And the bag would also hold a spare filter. The filters would come off, and these filters are good for 3 hours.
Right now we're going to be interviewing Private Josh Phillips. And Josh Phillips represents the American Expeditionary Force to Europe during World War I. At the time, these were known as doughboys. And the reason for that is that the American Red Cross, when they would prepare food for the men just prior to going across the channel to fight in Europe, would serve them fried dough, which the Europeans found to be unusual, and that's how they ended up being called doughboys. Now, am I correct about that?
Yes, it's true.
Okay. Now, could you tell us, since you haven't been there yet, what are some of your concerns about the fighting in Europe?
Well, first thing I would like to say is about the trenches, because you don't know if you're going to get gassed or going to get shot at, because it's a hard time in the trenches. You're also getting sick in a lot of the times, like, for example, malaria and other type of illnesses that you can get from other men.
Now, what have you heard about the possibility of being gassed over there, which I would think would be quite frightening?
Usually they drop mustard gas on you, which is poisonous and kill you. And also the other times, a lot of the gas can just blind you for about 2 days, maybe in a week. Sometimes they can just blind you, period.
Okay. Now, whereabouts from the United States did you come from?
Massachusetts, Dartmouth, Massachusetts.
Okay. Well, we wish you the best of luck in the fight over in Europe. Thank you very much, Private.
Thank you, sir.
Happy birthday, dear Corinne. Happy birthday to you.
Your choice to recycle can affect more people than you think. Call Marissa at 508-979-1493 to request your free recycling bins. This message was brought to you by the City of New Bedford and UMass Dartmouth Charlton School of Business.